All right, so I'll go ahead and start. So welcome to the University of Nevada, Reno Town Hall, a deeper conversation about racism, responses to implicit bias and police brutality. My name is Kaylee Britt, and I'm the Assistant Director of the Department of Diversity and Inclusion. On behalf of our department, thank you all for joining us here today. This online forum is meant to be a safe place to discuss the issues of systemic racism, police brutality, and implicit bias, which refers to attitudes and stereotypes we pick up from our environment that in turn subconsciously affect our understanding, decisions, and actions in America. Although we will not find all of the answers today, we can start having the important dialogue about issues that Black Americans, including the Black students at UNR, face on a daily basis. Though this conversation will be centered around several intense topics, the town hall will remain civil, productive, and fair. Please keep an empathetic, open mind as you hear directly about the experiences and ideas of Black students on campus, as well as direct statements from the UNR police chief. Today's town hall will be led by two moderators. The first is Marta Elliott, a UNR professor with a research focus on prejudice, discrimination, and stigma. She's also the chair of the sociology department. The second moderator is Jose Leon, the current director at the Center for Every Student, Every Story, an organization that aims to support students from all backgrounds. They will be in charge of the discussion and all questions. If you are called on, please keep your answer to about 3 minutes maximum, as we only have about 90 minutes allotted. I will now hand it off to the moderators.
Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us in this conversation today. I'm going to start by introducing our distinguished panelists. The first panelist is Dominique Hall. She's the current ASUN president. Dominique, are you here?
I am here. Hello.
Hello, great. We also have Michael Brody, who's a board member on the Black Business Student Association. You say hello.
Hello.
Next, we have Serene Townsell. She is the president of the Black Business Student Association and the co-president of Enactus. We also have Colin Abram, who is a mental health advocate and a student of political science. And we have Todd Renwick, who's the chief of police for the UNR Police Department. So we have a series of 4 questions that we're going to ask and spend quite a bit of time on each question. But not each panelist must respond to each question. When a panelist does respond, we'll ask them to keep their answer at about 3 minutes. And then after each panelist has had a chance to speak, we will be seeking questions from our participants. I'm now going to turn it over to Jose, who's going to talk about more about the rules for this town hall. Jose?
Hello, my name is Jose Leon, and I'd like to start by just acknowledging that although I identify as Latino and Mexican, I have white privilege, white presenting privilege, and that puts the context for how I experience the world, and many people do. And so I do not, I'm not here today to say I espouse any values in terms of an understanding that I don't have from a lived experience of being Black. And so I thank ASUN for welcoming me into this space, but I'd like to acknowledge that first because I think it's important in the context of the conversation we're going to have to see our privilege and to very verbally state it outright as I engage in this conversation today. So it's always important that in these conversations, although everyone is welcome to speak, we do want to center the Black voices within the conversation and not push them to the side, because this is not a time for that, and it never has been. But we're at a critical moment within our society. So if you'd like to speak, please raise your hand, and Assistant Director Britt will call on you during this period. The rules for the town hall are as follows. Please remain on mute unless called on to speak. We encourage you to keep your Zoom camera on your face, as it adds an inclusive experience to this town hall. It's also helpful to be on camera if you end up with a question or comment. If your words or actions become uncivil, or in the perception of the moderators in terms of a level of aggressiveness or hostile towards the conversation, there is a possibility that you may be removed from this, because we're attempting to engage in a deeper dialogue. We understand that these conversations are difficult, but we ask that you, as much as you can, remain in that space of positivity and openness to other people's perspectives, engaged and respectful of all attendees. Let's take care to remember that this is an educational and meaningful forum to understand each other's experiences. One of the most important ways to fight for social justice and equity is by educating yourself on the issue. And we must, and we hope that will happen over the next hour and a half. And this furthers your education and the education of our campus community. Without further ado, I'll pass it on to Marta.
Thanks, Jose. And I just wanted to add that I want to thank everybody for being here and for being vulnerable to this conversation that we're going to have, and being brave and willing to speak your voice and listen to one another and be respectful. I appreciate everyone for participating. The first question for our panelists and later for the audience is this: what efforts would you like to see the university and ASUN take to educate friends, families, and peers on the historical context of race in America and how to work towards racial justice? So open to whichever panelist would like to begin with that question.
I can begin. So I think this is a great question. I think what the university and ASUN can do to educate themselves in hopes of educating others is going to the affected group, which is right now the Black community. I think that these elected officers and our administration need to come to us. There shouldn't be anything where we should be going to them. I think that's kind of, I don't know. I personally don't think that's appropriate when you're dealing with an affected subject such as this one. So I think that listening to the affected group, which is the Black community at this moment, and listening to what they have been through would be a really good first step to educate themselves on Black issues and what we experience as Black people. I also think what's really helpful is if administration or ASUN officers would talk to their Black officers in administration. I think that if there is someone in power who is Black and officers aren't speaking to them or administration isn't speaking to them, that's where things can kind of like be misunderstood. Whereas if you would have just went to the Black officer or the Black administrator, then a lot of problems would be solved and a lot of things will be learned from that. And so, yeah, additionally, I just think listening to the Black community and going out to them would really help ASUN and the administration.
Would another panelist like to speak to this question?
Michael, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, when I first read over the question, I was sure that, Dom Hall had something great in store for ASUN this upcoming year. So I kind of focused my attention more on the university. I'm aware that there's like an alcohol-wise class that was in my to-do list for My Nevada when I first came on campus. How cool would it be if there was like a class that kind of talked about the historical context of race in America? That would be on all students' to-do list. It's not for a grade, it won't go on your GPA, but it's just something for others to be aware of. And outside of that, I think that there was not a lot of attendance in the Black initiatives that were on campus throughout the past year. I know Serene can speak on that and things like that, but I think it'd be so cool if President Mark Johnson would show up to these events and other leadership would show up to these events to show their support. So it's not just a thing where if something bad happens, we send out a letter, a newsletter, but it's an active membership and really caring each and every day. So that's my response to that.
I'd like to go ahead and talk to, oh, sorry, Colin. So the first thing I thought about was the diversity courses. So I might be wrong about this, but all students are required to take one CO10, which is the diversity and equity. So I think the minimum requirement should be 2. I think 2 is like the bare minimum that we should be doing. And there's a ton of options and all the classes look very interesting. And I know a lot of freshman students, they don't know really how to navigate My Nevada and see all of their options. So I don't know how helping that process would work, but definitely increasing that requirement to 2 classes, I think is a good step, along with what Michael was saying. I wasn't even thinking about the to-do list. That's good too, because then it's not for a grade, it's extra educational opportunity for students. I also had 2 other ideas. One of them couldn't really be implemented. It would be a UNR police civilian review board made up of students, and it would kind of reflect a community, or a, you know, like a regular civilian review board that police departments have. But currently Reno doesn't have one, so there wouldn't be one for UNR to connect to and reflect on. So that's not something we could do right now, but I also thought that was a good idea. And then I was thinking of a UNR student board that would act as a consulting group for the Department of Diversity, Inclusivity, and for other ASUN and UNR faculty that wanted to put on programs for students of color or anything like that, so they could consult with this student body who are students of color. So this idea came from the Black Scholars Dinner, which is something I think Michael was referencing to when he said that we don't see a lot of support and a lot of people coming out to our events. That dinner was crazy because I was so excited for it. I got dressed up, I did my essay, I showed up, and only 5 Black students were there. It was insane. It was sad, but we'll do better next time. But I was thinking during that dinner, what if we had a student board that lasted all year long, where if any department wanted to put on a program like the Black Scholars Dinner, they could consult this student board. The student board would say, yes, this is a good idea. This is how you can tweak it to make it more student friendly, to make it more targeted to the students that you want to target. And this is how we can better market it. Because that was one problem with the Black Scholars Dinner. It was like all 5 of the Black students who showed up had heard of it from one person. And so there's better ways to market it, and there's better ways to target people respectively and appropriately without saying, we just want you here for your color, you know? So I thought that was a great thing also because I forgot what his position was. He was the provost of something, but he was telling us how UNR likes to try to recruit more students of color because they want a diverse population. And that sounds great, but when they start recruiting them and the students come here, they realize that there's nothing that UNR really offers that's different or better than other schools that makes it worthwhile for them to come all the way out here. I mean, even if they don't have to travel, that makes it worthwhile for them to come to UNR compared to any other school, especially for Black students, because there are HBCUs available with all these scholarships because they really want us too. So what makes UNR worthwhile? And that's something that this student consulting group could help figure out with the UNR faculty and staff. So those are my thoughts.
So my name is Colin. The 2 things that I feel like I would recommend would, one being like a short-term community service component, a part of graduation, helping like underfunded schools with like tutoring. I feel like when we're sending students to go help these underfunded schools with minorities, can help them recognize their privilege. Because in my Education 202 class, I did a teaching internship at Dilworth Middle School, and that really opened my mind to like the different possibilities in like different schools environments. And I think also another thing, I feel like the best way to learn from the students of color is having students of color. UNR does not really have many students of color, and I feel like one way that we can do this is changing our scholarship basis, not so much based on ACT and SAT scores. I feel like it's common knowledge that majority of like Latinos, Hispanics, and Blacks and other minorities and lower people of socioeconomic statuses perform significantly lower than their white counterparts. And many people believe that like these students just cannot test as well, but I don't believe that's the problem. I feel like to get to the top access of some of the scholarships, you have to have a 30 on your ACT. And mind you, like taking ACT prep courses cost from $50 to $2,000, many of which these students of color do not have. Additionally, I would add that we should also add students should be able to have a better option for when going into their freshman year. A lot of students who do perform low on these ACT and SAT scores are forced into remedial courses, which basically like wastes their time and wastes their money, both of which students of color does not have. I think the University of Nevada, Reno can really work on trying to provide more financial aid to the students of color. It's time to put your money where your mouth is. We're talking about how we care about Black students. Let's open up your pockets and let's show how much we care and increase the amount of Black attendance in our schools.
Would anyone else on the panel like to speak?
Yeah, hi everybody. This is Todd Renwick, your chief of police here at the university. Serene, I really appreciated your comments too about the advisory board and review board. And I do want to let everyone know that these do exist, and they've actually existed for several years. We are in the process of reforming our advisory board. I've sent an email out, and I hope that President Hall works with me on that and others. We will be meeting very soon here on the 25th of June to have a new charge for that advisory board. We also have a review board that the system office is working on, so there'll be more reform coming on that as well. And I'm told that the system office will be involving our students as well through this process. So I really appreciate that. And I just want to comment too on Mikkel. Mikkel, I love that idea that you pose, you know, on before we come, one of the checklists of taking classes on the historical context. I think that's great. I appreciate that. Thank you, everybody.
I have a quick comment I'd like to add. So in response to Colin, I think you made some great points, because not only do Black people get discriminated against by the police, I also think that education is one of the main properties of discrimination against Black people. I think the American education system is systemically exclusionary of Black students. And I was just telling Senator Cortez Master that we need educational reform. But Colin, I think this is an appropriate place to bring up that Black student leaders and I created the Listen to Us platform, which had a lot of the things you brought up that the university is actually listened to and they are implementing. So I think that we also need to realize that our education system is not made for Black people. And that's something to keep in mind too when you're listening to this town hall.
Also, President Hall, one thing I want to add is, like, I feel like during my freshman year of my experience, with my roommates that I lived with in Peavine, I lived with 3 other roommates. Many of them did not believe, like prior to me coming in, that racism in America, that racism and these things do not exist. But once they were hanging around with me, once they were experiencing things, they were like, did you see that? Like, they're treating you differently. I'm like, I've been telling you this the whole time. So I feel like you said, the educational reform will help more students of color be able to attend college, therefore giving other people the access to actually see what is going on. Because it's one thing to learn about it, to see it in a textbook, and then it's one thing to see it through your own eyes.
Alrighty, so now we're going to open up the dialogue to attendees. So if any of you would like to speak, just go ahead and raise your hand, but we do have to limit it to 2 people, and then you guys can talk for about 3 minutes each. Ellie Jean, go ahead.
Hi, I would like to make a point that hasn't been made yet. I think something that UNR needs to do is hire more Black staff in all areas, because that will be what improves our education, is like a broadening of the canon of what we are currently learning. Because in my experience, it was just a completely whitewashed canon, which is what a lot of students experience. And I think what would help broaden that is diversifying the staff, honestly, and diversifying, if there is going to be police on campus, more Black police maybe. I don't know. I don't believe in having police on campus personally. So really that's my point. We need to have more Black teachers and to broaden the canon that is currently being taught.
Would anyone else like to speak? Connor, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I'm so sorry. I'm Connor Doyle. I'm a senator for the College of Liberal Arts. So I just had two things to say. I'm so sorry for speaking, but the first one was to Ellie Jean. I actually spoke to human resources in regards to this issue, in regards to hiring more people of color. And pretty much the answer that I got was there's not enough people of color with PhDs to hire. I think that is probably false. In my opinion, it sounded like an excuse. So I'm really hoping that as this comes to more attention, that they see that as more of a prevalent issue instead of an excuse, because this was last year. And then the second thing that I wanted to add was in terms of diversity courses. I believe someone talked about that earlier. I currently believe the diversity education is not adequate at all. If you look at a general business major, their diversity course is in the history of economics, which I don't think has anything to do with race or sexual orientation or anything like that. It's just the history of economics. And then if you look at a civil engineering course, it's about sustainability. So I just wanted to add that. Adding more diversity courses, I hope if they do add that requirement, that it's actually based on prevalent issues. Thank you for giving me the chance to speak.
Really quick, Dean Brooks, did you want to speak?
Yes, I don't know how to raise my hand on this system, so go ahead and call me a boomer. I'm okay with that. No, to the gentleman's question about just diversity and hires, I think he's absolutely 100% correct. I can imagine with me being a dean and going through the faculty ranks, how many times I've heard that. As a dean, I am responsible for hiring people. Before coming here, I was at the University of South Dakota, which is about 90% white, and we were able to hire 8 faculty of color in 3 years. If we were able to do it in South Dakota, and I absolutely 100% believe that this environment is much better for that we can do it here. I think it takes an intentional effort on all part, and I don't think the university has been biased in that. I think that, there are a small number of people of color in the field. 2% of all those with doctorates are of color. However, if we have something to sell, as the one young lady mentioned, then people would come here. There's a reason I came here. And if I would have heard the narrative that we don't have and those deficit discouraging things, I wouldn't be here. But I do think it takes a community. I think it takes things like this of us talking about what are those barriers for our students? What are those barriers coming in? As a person of color who applied for this position last year, yesterday, I actually being on board last year, yesterday, those are the questions I asked. What are the barriers? And then coming in, it wasn't something to discourage me, but something to say, okay, how can I contribute to ensuring that we can take down those barriers and we can move things? One of the things that I actually mentioned to Hall is that, being on campus and being the only Black academic leader on campus, I would love to be more a part of this and find out from you all's angle, how can I help move and shape practices and help to eliminate barriers as we do this work, because I think it's critically important, not just because of the opportunity that is presented before us, but to really think about how do we work together, engage together to create a community that we don't have things like we need more of this or more of that, but that it's easy to find. If we have those things that are easy to find, people will come here because they know they can find those things. So don't want to take up much of your time, but just wanted to say that.
I do want to make just a quick announcement that right before the hiring freeze, sociology and gender race identity studies were able to hire 2 new faculty of color for a position in African American and Black diaspora studies. And we had a great pool of many candidates of color, and we hired 2 Black women who will be starting on July 1st and who will be teaching diversity classes. Their names are Vidrika Etienne and Priska Gales. So I hope you'll be able to take their classes.
Thank you everybody for saying that. And to Connor, I think one of the important things to remember is Dr. Brooks is absolutely right. It's 2% of individuals of color receive that degree, but amongst those receiving PhDs, Black women are the highest number of individuals receiving PhDs. So we have to remember that statistically, there are individuals getting those. So we, our job as faculty and administrators, I think, is to break down these barriers, not simply to help folks navigate them. And that's really important for us to remind ourselves as we move up through the ranks that we can no longer remain silent in terms of those processes on campus.
And so one of the things I need to mention, you made me think of something, Jose, is that one of the things that I push up faculty as well when they bring the narrative to me is that we have to grow our own then. We have programs, we have doc programs on campus, then why not work with other departments to do that, to move that, put resources in place to do those type of things. When I was getting my doctorate, there were 4 universities that offered me stipends to get my degree with them and then later teach with them. And so there are opportunities to do that. We just have to kind of think of these strategies and do those type of things.
Thank you. That's also very important. It's very true that we have to keep our eye on the prize in terms of mentorship, and we have a responsibility to that, as all of us do, not just faculty and staff of color, but all of us have a responsibility to that. We're going to transition in terms of our question focus to more of a more focused question. What does effective government and police response to the murders of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and Tony McDade look like, and look like to others? So we want to look at what does effective government and police response look like to these incidences, because we know it's part of a long trajectory of 400 years of oppression. It's not part of a thing, it may be on people's mind because of the current state of civil unrest in our country, but that's the question that we're asking to the panel.
I guess I'll start if no one else wants to start. But to me, what I think needs to happen for this to be effective following these murders is there needs to be significant criminal justice reform. There needs to be police reform from the government and the police. I think that if there were, I just think police officers need cultural competency. But then I read a article, it's called Confessions of a Former, and I don't want to say the word cop, B-cop, whatever. And pretty much it's from a former cop who tells all the secrets of the police union and how it's systemic in discrimination, violence. And honestly, if you compare the police and the military, they're very similar. And I just think that it's really problematic to think about that we have military style officers who are supposed to be peace officers on our streets. And it's really problematic that we fund the police more than we fund our education system. That's why I just think that our country focuses too much on defense violence than they do with education. And I think that's a huge problem and it needs reform at the federal level. And then I just think that the police, once again, need cultural competency training. It needs to be systemic in their trainings, the things that they're learning. I think there needs to be more Black police officers. And yeah, I just think there needs to be significant reform. And also, I think criminal justice reform goes into this as well. In my opinion, there shouldn't be anyone serving 20 to 30 years for a nonviolent offense when we have people who create violent offenses and they get less charges than those with drug offenses. And the war on drugs was systemically pursuing Black people and the hippies and people of color. So I personally think that this goes down to criminal justice reform, education reform, and police reform.
Thank you, President Hall. Would the other panelists like to weigh in on the question? Oh, Serena, and then Todd.
Okay. So I based my answer around the civilian review board. So Officer Todd, if you want to chime in, because it seems maybe I have misinformation. So I thought Reno PD did not have a civilian review board made up of civilians, not made up of their, chief officer, lieutenant, internal people. So do they have one made up of outside people, community? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you're correct on Reno Police Department. I was speaking on behalf of your university police department. But but if you're specifically talking about Reno Police Department, I believe you're correct.
Okay, so that's what I would say is we need a civilian review board to increase accountability within the police department. And so this review board can have their own objectives. It could be modeled after, there's a ton in the country that it could be modeled after, and a ton of resources to figure out how to create this board and how to sustain it over time. Their goals might be to go over police complaints and whatever the chief officer had decided was the punishment for the police officer who received a complaint. Their job could be to look over that and see if it needs any tweaking, if the punishment fits the crime kind of thing. Their job can also be kind of looking at the statistics of arrests and, you know, police officer misconduct and stuff like that. It could also be figuring out, and this was like a more advanced civilian review board that I was looking at that had an auditing process attached to it, but they had an auditor who would look at the way that the officer would assign punishment to the employees that had been, you know, caught with misconduct or whatever. And so there's a lot of processes that could go through it. There's a lot of levels to a civilian review board. So I think just trying to start one is not that hard. And the biggest limitation is the money, but there are so many resources and so much research done into this that just getting it started, there's a lot to go off of right now. So that's what I would say is the big thing that can happen right now, like today. So that's my response.
Thank you. And now, Chief Renwick.
Thank you. I just want to answer a question that came out because me and my technological savvy, I sent it to Dr. Easton Brooks privately instead of everyone. But to answer your question about what we are looking for in these boards, and really for me, we want folks that show an interest in these boards. It's not my board or it's not the police department's board. This would be our university community's board. So I hope that answers the question. We need students, faculty, and staff who are interested, that will make a commitment to it and be a productive member on that, either one of those boards. Now, having said that, for, you know, what does the effective government and police response to these murders look like? And from a police chief, from me personally, you know, I think that this has to be swift. This has to be open and transparent. And we've got to see productive change. That's my thoughts.
All right, so we'll now open up this dialogue to, sorry, Jose.
Oh, no.
So if anyone would like to speak, go ahead and raise your hand and I will call on you.
I just wanted to add, I just appreciate Todd for being in this call today. I think that's one of the many examples of how, you know, police should respond to issues like this, is really being in the uncomfortable conversations. You know, he could have sat back, relaxed today, but he's choosing to be on this call. So I do appreciate you, Todd, for doing that. And then as far as government goes, I just get really tired when I see, you know, pictures on social media of them doing some, I don't know, it seems really set up, you know, like going down to, you know, the funeral and taking all these pictures. And so I don't appreciate that. I just want our government to be sincere, to be bold, and to not make everything so, I don't know, just like dramatic. And I really want them to really care and not just only care when things seem like it's, you know, crazy.
And I also wanted to add, I feel like a response that would be great to responding to these are allowing people to protest. You know, you have people who are protesting stay-at-home orders with semi-automatic rifles outside of the governor's house marching, but the military presence, and like there wasn't the rubber bullets, there wasn't flashbangs thrown at them, there weren't armor bullets, there wasn't SWAT, there weren't SWAT snipers. And I feel like allowing people to protest, and I feel like the actions that Todd is taking today, Chief Todd is taking today, is very great. Like you have in different cities of police departments and chiefs marching with the different protesters, agreeing with them, saying, hey, we understand you have every right to protest. You have every right to voice your opinion in your government. And sometimes even some chief officers have like met with them before and asked, is it okay if I attend the protest? And having that dialogue and showing that you are there to listen and that you understand what is going on. Because I feel like for majority of police officers, what happened to George Floyd is inconsistent with their protocols. That's like plain and simple. Like majority of the police officers you talk to, it's most of them agree with that. And so I feel like if we would have just acknowledged that we can talk to different people about the different issues, then it would be a little bit better.
This is Shadi Martin. Can you all hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
go ahead and speak.
Thank you so much. I'm the Dean of School of Social Work, and I had been thinking about the idea of offering courses to police officers from the School of Social Work. We offer this wonderful course called Structural Oppression that really addresses a lot of the issues around racism, sexism from a very fundamental and a deep level. And so a very self-reflective course, and most of our students really walk away from it feeling transformed. And they often say, why isn't this required to all students? So I actually sent an email to President Johnson saying, could we work with the police department, starting with UNR police department, to develop this, either offer our course. I see your thumbs up. I'm happy to see that because you're on my schedule to meet with you. But I thought this is a good opportunity to share this with you, either to make our courses available to your officers, or we could develop a course specific that would meet the needs and address any time limitations that your officers may have for a regular course. Would you have interest, or do you already have any similar courses?
First of all, absolutely have interest. I am really looking forward to that conversation with you. We do have officers that take a lot of these similar types of courses, but I can't imagine they're going to be as in-depth or the potential that you could possibly offer us. So I really look forward to that conversation.
Let me add to that. Because of our degree, our graduate degree actually, in equity and diversity, we've done some work with social work. Our faculties have worked together. I think it would be a good, kind of point of even thinking about it from that kind of both that social work and educational lens. I think anyone else that kind of, can provide training for this. What Dr. Martin kind of made me think about was that Starbucks offers their employees over 77 different implicit bias trainings. And, we look at these covert trainings and all these other things, putting together some of these kind of hour-long training, 30-minute trainings and continually do this might be a great idea for the police department and for our campus as a whole, so that we really kind of provide those type of things. But also what she made me think about is what was brought up by other students as well, and I'll get right on this email, is to find out what courses do we provide that deals with equity, diversity, and cultural responsiveness, and making sure that we are letting people know that we do have those things on campus, because even as a dean, some of those things are hidden if I don't know them within my own department. So I think that's a great idea, and I think, it could really show a community effort in this as well, even if it's led by social work, but having other people that are able to kind of contribute to what it is they're able to do.
We would love to work with you, Dean Eastenbrook. And I want to say also, Chief Renwick, I'm actually having an appointment with Sheriff Balaam to pitch the same idea with him, and he has so far been receptive. So I think there's potential to make a contribution there.
Great news. Looking forward to it.
Thank you.
All right, Ryan, did you want to speak?
Yes, thank you. If I remember, the question was, what does effective government response look like? And I think one thing that we need to understand is what the root problems to a lot of and why police respond that way. We need to understand that number one, legislation is not sufficient. For example, the chokehold used on Eric Garner a few years ago has been banned for at least a decade at that point. Legislation was not effective in saving his life. We need to understand that excessive funding of the police means that we are depriving other programs, we're depriving them of funds. We need to divest from police, not entirely, but in some way, and invest more wholly in community-based solutions. For example, focusing on affordable housing, creating jobs through public works programs, and like President Hall said, investing in education. And I think investing in those kinds of resources would help immensely in reducing poor communities, especially Black communities, preventing them from needing to resort to crime due to a lack of resources. And I think another part of an effective police response is not resorting to performance. Like Michael said, I believe he was referring to Mayor Jacob Frey of Minneapolis and his crying at a funeral and then saying essentially that there would be no fundamental change. And I think part of that fundamental change needs to be, in part, defunding the police and scaling down police presence. And, you know, as far as I understand, you don't need riot gear if there's nothing to riot about. And I think when we talk about effective police and government response, we need to look at why we treat police as needed. And we treat police as needed due to us wanting to stop crime. But policing doesn't prevent crime. It stops them after the fact. And I think we need to understand that we should look to the real problems of why people are turning to crime and focus on addressing those issues.
All right, does anyone else from the audience want to speak?
I would like to kind of build off of what Ryan was saying. I do agree that we need to be focusing on not giving the police any extra funding. Especially with the classes that were mentioned, if that was to be implemented, the police should have to pay for those classes individually because we should not be adding more money into their funding. We should be redirecting it into the areas that are actually needed. And in regards to diversifying courses, having diversity courses, we need to make it so every class includes everybody's perspective so that when the business kids are learning about business history, they learn about how business has affected people of color and the discrepancies with that, so that every group of kids in every different type of school and every class are learning these things. So it's not just a matter of taking 1 or 2 CH classes. And I don't think that's enough for the police either. I don't think teaching the police not to be racist is going to make them stop being violent. That's just not the case. We need to defund the police and invest in areas where violence is coming from in order to solve this problem on a fundamental level.
Can I add something? I'm sorry, I can't see the hands, and if I'm out of line, just tell me to be quiet or mute me.
You're okay, Dean Brooks, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. And I think to your point, I think you make a very good point. A lot of my research over the last couple of decades have really been around equity and diversity and policies, et cetera. You know, and I, find myself doing a lot of policy stuff, breaking down barriers and et cetera, et cetera. I wrote a book last year, really looking at equity and how do we diversify our educator workforce. And one of the things that I looked at in that book is I did research to kind of find out where we missing the point in education around understanding equity and diversity and working with equitable communities. So I surveyed about 450 teachers across the country of all ethnicities. And in every state, diversity is required to get your teacher license. So I asked all the teachers who were teaching, have you taken a course in multicultural education, equity and diversity, et cetera? 98% of the teachers have taken a course. When I asked them, do you use this in your practice? Latinx population, about 97% said, yes, I use this in my daily practice. Black African American, about 95% said, yes, I use this as my everyday practice. White teachers, 70% said, yes, I use this in my daily practice. And as I started to talk to people in the field about why this is the case, and what they suggested to me was that what happens is that people take it because it's a requirement, but it doesn't mean that they are invested in it. So in the same way that you take subjects in your area, you are invested in them and you're going to do well in them. Those courses that are required, you get them out of the way, right? So if you're taking math and you're a photo major, you're like, look, give me the D and let me move on. You wouldn't do that because we have outstanding students here, but you get the gist, right? And so what we need to do, what I found we need to do, is exactly what the young lady mentioned. We have to make sure that it's not a one-off. We have to make sure that what we do is intentional. And it has to be something that is repeated and provide for people like Officer Tom ways to check to make sure that people are grasping the knowledge that we want them to have. But we can't make the assumption that just because a person takes a class, that they get it. This is why in college, when you ask you to major in something, we don't say take one photography class and you're a photographer, right? You take a number of classes to really understand how to be a professional in that area. And in the same way with this, we have to get away from those one-offs and do those things. And even in our curriculum, as we're thinking about how do we provide those opportunities to share a more pluralistic society in which this country was built, but we have to really think about that. And so in this as well, and I'm doing this, and Dr. Martin to do this as well when we talk to leadership, we have to continue to push that just because we have these one-offs doesn't make us proficient. And I've been married for 20 some odd years, and I wish I knew how to be proficient in being a husband, but I have to keep doing these things and working on these things because it's not something that's natural for me to really understand all of what it means to be a husband. But hopefully I'm a good husband.
Thank you, Dean Brooks. We appreciate that input. And it's very valuable to our conversation. Thank you for being here today. We're going to be transitioning to our next question. Just to be cognizant of time, we are moving through, and thank you for everyone for engaging, and I'll pass this to Marta.
Thanks, Jose. Oh, this next question is really important. It's going to ask us to think about where we think the implicit bias of the police force comes from. And I'll add that it isn't always just implicit. As we've seen, it's often quite explicit. And thinking about the source of this bias, which all of us have some bias, we're speaking specifically to the police right now, it can help us think about solutions. So again, the question, and we'll start with the panel, is, in your opinion, where does the implicit bias on the part of the police force come from?
Well, I'm hoping maybe I could start this off. For me, I think it definitely comes and starts with the leadership. I think that at times it's probably lack of training, and I think another large piece of this would be what's the department's culture like internally, and how are we as leadership? And when I talk about leadership, I talk about myself, command staff, and supervisors should be on top of this internally to make sure that this is not what the department culture is about. And quite honestly, just bluntly, ignorance. That's where I think it comes from.
Thank you, Todd.
In my opinion, once again, I think this implicit bias, where it stems from is how our police system is systemically. I think that you have to understand this, you have to realize the populations in the prison system. So there are only 12% of Black people in America, but there are 70% of our incarcerated population are Black people. And I think when you look at that, you have to think of our laws that have been here for years. This even goes back to the 13th Amendment, because it does say that although slavery is abolished, it said unless punishable by law, something like that. And so that is prison. Essentially, our prison is where they're holding slaves and 70% of the Black Americans. So I think that where this implicit bias comes from is the systemic oppression in the police systems, like in our law enforcement, our laws, our entire country. I think that there literally is a reason why there's so many Black people in prison and there's not that many in America. So I think it's all systemic and things really need to change in order for this to, I guess, improve itself. But yeah, I'm not a police officer, but I wouldn't say like training and stuff. I just think it's systemic.
Who else on the panel is ready to chime in on this question?
I feel like everyone, regardless of job occupation, can possess a bias. And I feel like also we can also, since we all do possess these biases, we can act on them subconsciously. I feel like by maybe implementing policies similar to what Oakland City did. So Oakland City, they used to have a foot pursuit policy where if someone runs down an alley or into a backyard, that a cop can chase after them and go after them. But instead, during the time when they had that exact policy, they would have 8, give or take, officer-involved shootings yearly. And so they changed that policy. So if someone does run into an alley or in a backyard, they're forced to set up a perimeter, which gives them an opportunity to step back and think instead of acting in fear. It gives them a time to step back and think and say, okay, this is how I should proceed with this situation. Because, with our biases, it can be triggered with stress or whatever. You might feel like you're in harm's way. So I feel like that's one way that we could address this issue.
Panelists, would anyone else like to speak before we move to our audience?
I just want to build off of what Dominique said. I agree that this is a systemic issue and that there is racism present in all areas of life. It's not just within the police department. It's in our schools. It's everywhere. And police officers are just people. They're individuals. They're not, anything other than that. And if they have biases in their own lives that they learned at home, they're going to bring that to their jobs. And the police is an institution, like I think we need to address more, that it is somewhat of a racist institution, especially in our country. It was built to capture, escape slaves and to really enforce the desires of the ruling class and not to protect us, the proletariat. It's really not there to protect us. So I think that this bias is like somewhat implicit just in the institution of police departments.
All right. Would anyone else in the audience like to speak?
Yeah. So just building off of that, off of Dom and Ellie Jean as well, like there's definitely been a very intentional criminalization of Black people in this country. And you can view it simply from just looking at how like drug offenses are treated. With the crack epidemic, it was treated so much as a criminal issue, as a criminal offense. But now that white people are addicted to opioids, it is getting an extremely different reaction from government and from law enforcement, and it's being tackled with treatments and people are being covered on insurance to get therapy. It's being treated as a mental health issue, as an addiction problem. But for Black people, it was viewed as a criminal offense and a way to systemically put Black people in prison. Like it was just a segue to that. And kind of just building off of like the last question as well that was asked. I think that as much as it was intentional to break down Black people in this country, like the response needs to be just as intentional to build them up. Like we can't, excuse my language, we cannot be half-ass whenever we're tackling these issues and tackling them with these performative responses of kneeling and police walking with people. Like that doesn't change anything. Like we need to change our laws, we need to change our systems, we need to defund the police. Like we cannot have performative responses to very systemic, intentional breaking down of these communities. And it's on every single level. Like that's the thing we also need to recognize. Like everything feeds into to each other. Everything is intersectional, like, you know, criminalization and the reason why like George Floyd could be killed in the middle of the street comes from a lot of different like aspects of other like other systemic issues.
Ryan, go ahead and talk.
I 100% agree with what President Dom and what Ellie Jean has said. And I do believe that implicit bias comes from a systemic issue. And I think it's also important to note that implicit bias is not necessarily, it's not necessarily simply actions, you know? People can contribute to can act on implicit biases without being 100% conscious of them. And it 100% has to do with the system that is presented to them and the system that they must work within. There's a lot of there are a lot of boundaries that police have to work within. And the structure and the system that they must work within is, in part, one of the bigger aspects of implicit bias. And I would say that, again, bias is learned or comes from experience. We can start to eliminate bias, not completely eradicate it through this measure, but at the very least, we need to elevate voices of the marginalized, especially Black voices. And I think when we create more opportunities for Black people to step up and we elevate those voices, once we give them those opportunities, that is the most important thing that we can do to begin to combat bias, especially implicit bias.
Thank you, Ryan. That was a good summation of what we're talking about. I know that many individuals were already leaning into this direction, but the next question that we were going to ask the panelists is, what examples of systemic racism have you either experienced, witnessed, or observed? And we'd be willing to share some of those things with you. We understand this question asks for some level of vulnerability. So if you just want to give an observation or general statement, we're completely comfortable with that, of course. But again, what examples of systemic racism have you experienced, witnessed, or observed? We'll start with the panelist. Serena?
So really quick, I want to add on to the last question before moving on to this one. So of course, I agree with what everyone said, but like very well put. I think a lot of it has to do with our perspectives too. For some reason, I mean, we know how the police came to be about, right? They were slave catchers, and that's why they were held so high in society. But for some reason, we still think that they're very untouchable. I mean, until the recent protests, and you see how much that protest can change, you know, like they got the George Floyd murderers arrested because of the protests, and we're bringing light to different issues because of our voices. But for some reason, our perspective has been that police are largely untouchable. And I think that that's their perspective too. And that's why they're so confident, so audacious with all these terrible things that have been happening. Also, my mom was telling me about an NPR podcast that she listened to where one chief police officer, he was in a smaller town, so this was more feasible, but he decided to change the entire values within his police station. Instead of them being warriors, they're now guardians. And so the whole mindset has changed. They're not out to attack, they're out to protect. So instead of trying to intervene and, you know, trying to take someone to jail or do this or that, they're trying to like stop things, prevent things, come in between for the safety of the person that they're trying to protect. So from warriors to guardians, I think that's amazing. That's something I could definitely stand behind. So we're saying defund the police, and I totally agree with that. But also there has to be a deep change in values, because this is a culture that has been passed on for generations, and that's why they still have this implicit bias, is because that's what it was birthed from, was from discrimination and hate. So if you don't change the values that they work from, that they base their training off of, then they're still going to be teaching new people these things that have traces of implicit bias in it. So I thought that was really cool. I'll try to find that NPR podcast. But to answer the example of systemic racism, This had to do with me and my mom. So I was born and raised in Reno Sparks area. And this was 5th grade, I think. I was attending an after school program, like because your parents have to work late. And my mom, she was a single parent. So, she always went to work early and came home late. So one day she was late picking me up, and the after school program closed at 5:30, but the people were so anxious to get me out of there. And so they had me call everyone I know at 5:15. I was calling my uncles, my grandparents. And then before I was even done, they called the police to come over. And I didn't really know a lot of what was happening until recently when I talked with my mom about it again. But what happened was the police went to my mom's house, found she was distraught. She was there. She was very distraught, emotionally vulnerable, and they arrested her on the spot. They didn't hardly ask any questions. They drove her down to the police station, put her in jail, and she didn't even see those same officers again. The rest of the night, she had to stay overnight, so she wasn't even allowed to come back to her child. I was only, 5th grade, 9 or 10 years old. And she didn't get everything sorted out until she started talking to a social worker. So thank God for social workers. And even the social worker said, this is not the response we take when a parent is late picking up their child from an after school program. And I talked to a professor of mine who's a truancy officer, and he's familiar with this stuff too. He says usually the state will try to take the child away if they think something bad is happening with the parent. And so my mom ended up being charged with child neglect. She had to, every day for 2 or 3 months, she had to take breathalyzer tests. And so she had to leave work to do that. And there was just a lot of stuff going on. I kept getting pulled out of classes to go and to do interviews with a social worker. What had happened was my mom's best friend had just died that day, and that's why she was so emotionally distraught. And we had just moved to Reno 2 years before, so she didn't have, like a large network of friends to fall back on, and my grandparents were out of town. And so all of this was happening, and the police decided, well, let's just arrest her, take her down, throw her in jail, and then our job is done. And the rest is left up to the social workers who had to come and interview me. And so that point was somewhat of a turning point in my mom and I's life, but it didn't need to be that way. Like there was so many other ways that could have went. And so I asked my professor to, because I didn't know whether to call this racism. So I asked my professor, what are the usual steps that are taken? And we found out that these were extreme steps that were taken. And my mom had no previous offenses, so that's something that we've experienced and just kind of sat there like, is this racism? Am I going crazy? Am I being targeted right now? Am I going to be okay after this? I mean, it was a weird moment, but yeah, that's my story.
Thank you for offering that and the vulnerability that you take to share that with us today. Thank you. And we'd like to move to other panelists if you'd like to answer the question.
Can I give a quick example before I head out?
Yeah.
I think it's important for me to voice what I've experienced in this last few months as president. I think systemically, Black students aren't really meant for the role to be ASUN president. If you look at our governing documents, if you look at our constitution, it's very exclusionary to marginalized groups. And if you look at the past presidents, I am the 4th Black person to be president here, and there has been like 100 student body presidents on this campus. And so when I ran, when I ran here to be student body president, that was my first time experiencing racial discrimination from so many different people. I had people discriminating me that I thought were my friends, stuff like that. And even when I won president, a lot of people were upset that a Black woman is student body president. So I think that with this role and any leadership role systemically, it's very exclusionary to Black students, especially at a PWI such as this one. But yeah, I just remember when I won the next day, like I wasn't even happy because I just saw all of these people coming at me, and people may think they weren't coming at you because you're Black, but honestly, if you were to put a white male in my position, he would not be attacked as many times as I was, and how I still continue to be attacked, nitpicked, all of that. So I just personally think that this position has opened a lot of eyes to me and shown me people's true colors, that they do have implicit bias in them, and there is systemic racism in these institutions such as leadership positions on campus.
That's a good point that you raise in terms of that. So thank you for sharing, President Hall, with that and taking the risk to share that with us in terms of your role. We truly appreciate that for your time with us. Colin, Michael, and then Todd.
So my example, thank you so much, President Hall, for sharing your experience. Because I was literally sitting here, I was like, I don't, I don't think I could do it, but you know, you gave me the courage. Thank you so much. So my experience was recently at the protest in Las Vegas on the night that the officer was shot. Um, I was, my friends had me standing between them. There were two white girls. They're like, Colin, stand between us, stand between us. And a lot of people were running behind us saying, they're shooting rubber bullets, they're shooting rubber bullets. So we began to run, pick up our speed. And then, so then officers come out charging at us. And I remember one officer was like, go, go, go. So I was like, okay, thank you. And I'm running and I get tackled and arrested by another officer. And then I start getting weird questions where it was like, you really didn't seem like you were at the protest. It seemed like you were, just hanging out. You were spectating. I was like, no, officer, I'm here for the protest. This is my second protest. And then I asked, what was I being arrested for? They were like, oh, give us a second. We'll figure out in a second. And then later it was supposed to be disorderly conduct. And then I was like, what? I was on the side walking. And then it was failure to disperse. I was like, not only did we walk 5 miles to protest, but we had to walk 5 miles back. So you can't tell someone to disperse after when they walked 5 miles and 2 seconds later to ask them to disperse. And so the questioning that I was receiving kind of seemed like they thought I was the one who shot the cop. And that experience, because luckily I had it recorded and I was able to show them like, hey, like it was not me. And the thing is like I was sitting there, I was like, I'm gonna go to jail. Like and they were telling me, they're like, you're going to jail tonight. And then it ended up being, ended up being detained. And it was one of like the hardest experience for me. Like I'm still in the process of accepting it. Like literally the next day, I was like talking to my therapist and I was just like in sobs. I was just like, oh my God, like this is like, I was literally with my 2 friends. I was not doing anything different, but I was slammed to the ground and arrested while they were told to go. If that's, yeah, so thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, for folks that are inside of the group right now, individuals do not have to share these stories. And oftentimes these things and these traumatic incidents become consumables. It's for those that are not experienced them or hold a privilege that doesn't have them experience those things. So I want us to take time to remember that as we're listening to these stories. People don't have to share them. So thank you very much for offering these pieces, all of you that have shared so far. Would anyone else in the panel like to offer any and any other additional responses?
Mikhail, were you going to go and then I can go?
Yeah, I mean, I just, I recall a moment when I was, growing up in Washington, in a neighborhood that I was in. There was a bag with a paper and a rock in it, and it said, if they're brown, flush them down. And there's a rock in every single bag. And I just remember seeing that as a young child and thinking like, this is where I'm growing up in. I remember, walking to every house and picking up this bag. That was just such a racist comment. And I just remember, going with my mom and her telling me stories on what it meant, on the confidence I should be on, being a Black American here. And I just remember doing that. And then I also, just even now, I think about, peers of mine, mentors I look up to where, they've been in the prison system before. And now they're guilty until they're proven innocent, and I see the struggles that, some of these ex-cons have been through, and it just doesn't sit right with me. I think that there's definitely a lot wrong. I have great pride in being a Black man today. But, these stories, like you'll hear, now and later, these stories are real. And, I just hope that we take them very seriously.
Serene, Mikhail, Colin, those of you that have had these personal experiences, I'm sorry. My experiences that I see, I hear like this, like I'm hearing today, or I read in police reports or through emails from others, or folks that walk up and tell me of something that has happened to them. I do want to comment, Serene, on the guardian warrior theory. I can't agree with you more. Let me tell you, traditional policing isn't working anymore. Specifically on a college campus, we have to have a guardian mindset. Now, I do want to throw a caveat out there that there is still violence. There is still violence that happens on college campuses, schools, in our cities that we have to still be able to move towards that warrior mentality for protection of not only self, but others. But I full-heartedly agree and accept that we must have the guardian mindset to do our jobs in today's world.
Well, thank you, everyone, for sharing that piece. I know that that was not easy, and we're going to open it up to the general floor right now and turn it over to Assistant Director Britt to facilitate our open conversation at this point.
All right, so if anyone has anything to add, go ahead and raise your hand and I'll call on you now. Dean Brooks.
Hi. Yeah, I think it's I'm glad to hear students share this. Sad, but glad to hear that students are able to have a safe place to share this. You know, I have 26. I have 56 years in this. And I won't go with the history of it, but what it made me think about, especially with young people, I go through this and I've kind of developed this callous about this and just try to live my life and fight the injustices that happen to other people rather than myself. And it doesn't make it less stressful or less emotional. It's still at that point. But what really hit me one year, I'm with my son who is going to be a freshman at UNR this year, but at the time he was 10 years old. And we were pulled over by the police and he said to me, "Do you realize that this is the 8th time this year you've been pulled over?" And this is only the times that he was with me. And in 8 times you've been pulled over, you've never gotten a ticket. And you haven't been speeding or anything, you're just pulled over. And I was like, wow. And it never, like, okay, I just, whatever, right? But when I look at him, it was really a stress on him and really a concern and worry on him of thinking, is this what policing is about? And is this what happens to everyone? Not knowing that every time this happened, when he talked to his friends' parents or fathers were not going through the same thing. So it wasn't me teaching him about the racial challenges that happens. It was him experiencing those implicit biases of what happens. And every conversation was about, where are you going? Whether I was dressed in a suit or whether I was dressed in workout clothes, where are you going? And what I think it's challenging for people to understand, just as Colin mentioned, is that emotional stress, that intense stress, and we don't think about trauma, stress at minor levels, but trauma at minor levels are just as critical and they're just as impactful, and they build and they build and they build. And it makes it very challenging. And so, when we think about these implicit biases, it's not just a notion of people going through something, but it's a matter of that stress that it's put on us. And every time we think about being stopped or whatever the case may be, we think about, what the possibility of this stop could be. Is this going to be death now? Is it going to be going to jail? How do I handle myself? How do I control my frustration of being stopped for the 8th time with my son in the car and making sure I don't do anything that get him put in protective services, that doesn't get myself put in jail, but having to be emasculated, to be dehumanized simply because I'm in a car driving. Those kind of things are are very challenging. And I know it's hard for other people to see, but just I for me, it's a matter of, as you go through life, you kind of learn how to deal with it, but it doesn't take away that trauma and stress that is felt by those around you. So yeah, just wanted to kind of share that it's a stress that's challenging. I have to admit, sorry, in coming to Nevada, people warned me about living in Northern Nevada and this being, I can't remember the concept, something about the old Mississippi or something to that effect, and learning the history of it. And I've experienced some just, I don't know, things that are not minor, but things that are very implicit here that really blows my mind. And the thing I think about with this, and I'm not saying others have to have the same experience, my safest place in Reno is on campus, believe it or not. It's where I get the response of safety and responded to by the police department on campus much better than I do off campus, which is sad.
Thank you for bringing that up, Dean Brooks. That's a really vulnerable conversation, but an important one to address. So thank you for that. Did anyone else from the audience want to make a comment? Destiny, go ahead.
Hi. So this is not something that has happened to me, but can very likely happen to me in the future. And this is regarding racism in the medical field. And I've actually learned that Black women have a higher chance of dying due to pregnancy complications or during birth or giving birth. So I kind of saw this thing as an obstacle that other races of women don't necessarily have to go through. And I've also learned that when taking into account of educational status or wealth or income, that still doesn't matter when it comes in terms of race and like pregnancy issues or medical issues and racism in the medical field. So sorry, I'm just trying to like come up with my words, but I recently found out that white women who have a lower educational status compared to Black women who have a higher educational status, Black women still have a higher chance of dying in that regard. And the same thing with wealth. Black women who are wealthier still have a higher chance of dying or having some kind of complications in their pregnancy when it comes to racism in the medical field compared to white women who have a lower educational status. So this is not something that I have gone through right now, but this is something that can very much happen in the future. And it's not only in terms of pregnancy or pregnancy related issues, but racism in the medical field altogether. There's rumors that medical students see that Black people don't experience pain as well as other races, that Black women or Black people in general have a higher tolerance for pain. And that kind of stereotype or that kind of judgment can be very dangerous to Black people and Black women in general. And then at the same time, I've learned that in order for Black women like myself or other Black people to remain safe when it comes to medical racism, we have to document every single thing that happens in the office. So if a doctor decides not to do a certain procedure because they might not believe your pain or believe your symptoms, then you would have to ask them to document that so they can be held accountable in the future if anything were to come up. So I think this is a certain part of racism that is kind of kept under the rug or not talked about as much, but there's definitely racism in the medical field and racism when it comes to pregnancy and delivering and other issues like that.
All right, thank you for that, Destiny. Did anyone else want to speak from the audience?
I'll just say something about health inequalities for just a second, if somebody's composing their thoughts. And because in sociology and public health, there's really strong evidence that racism contributes to health inequalities and the kind of things people are describing here, the stressors of being pulled over, being arrested, these kind of chronic stressors build up and demonstrably affect things like blood pressure and heart disease and low birth weight and all those health outcomes. I mean, it's not just murder, the worst possible outcome that instigated us to come together and talk, but just the day-to-day drip, drip, drip of these stressors have very serious health consequences. And we often think heart disease is caused by lifestyle factors. You don't eat right, you know, or you don't get enough exercise, but they're also caused by social factors, and racism is a really huge one. And there is good objective research on that. If anyone is interested, you can contact me to see it. It helps to have that in your back pocket.
All right, so before I conclude the town hall, are there any other additional comments anyone would like to make? Connor, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I just want to say thank you so much. I really, truly learned a lot. I've really been struggling with this issue because as a white cisgender male, I have never, ever experienced anything like this. So I truly appreciate the experience to learn. And I've really been struggling with, you know, when can I use my white privilege, and when am I being the white savior, and also when should I stand back and listen? So I just want to say thank you so much. And I really learned a lot. So thank you for hosting this, and thank you for all of the experience that people were so bravely willing to share.
I just wanted to thank the ASUN officers and your Office of Diversity and Inclusion for the invitation to be here today, and everyone on the panel and anyone that spoke to their vulnerability. It's difficult to open up in these spaces, especially right now. And it's important for white folks and white appearing folks to do their work. So the next step is reading. There was a list of movies and documentaries and books and articles that were applied there. There were deans that spoke. Please do your work. That's an important aspect of this. Even myself, 20 years in this field, I continuously have to read and educate myself on a regular basis. So please take this opportunity to do so.
Soreen, go ahead.
Oh, there we go. Okay, so quickly, Mike Hell is actually the president of the Black Business Student Association, not me. So that was a little miscommunication within the club. But I am a board member. But please remember, do come out to all of our events, programs, club meetings, really try to support us. I mean, your physical presence there means so much, especially when we notice that it's not there. It feels like where's the support? You said you would support, but you're not going to, right? So just how at the beginning of this conversation, we talked about, you know, where's President Mark Johnson? Why doesn't he come to these things? Or how do we get the word out to more people to really show their support that they said that they're going to invest in us? So remember to come out to our events when we start posting it, when the fall semester starts again. That's all.
Yeah, and in light of that, thank you for all of the other ASUN officers and senators who all came out today and took a chance to just learn and listen to Black voices and Black students at UNR. So thank you for that. Unfortunately, we are coming to the end of our time, but again, thank you all for attending this town hall and engaging in today's conversation. Our department noted that there were several questions and comments that were pointed out in the Zoom chat. And I just wanted you guys all to know that they're being compiled by our department, and we'll be discussing those in our debrief after this. And we'll be sharing those with the panelists and potentially use those for our next town hall. Additionally, the Diversity and Inclusion Department is excited to announce that for the remainder of the summer and going into our fall academic year, we're going to be working on launching a new campaign called Proud to Be Blank at Nevada. So its goal is to bring people together and virtually share the stories and experiences of various UNR students from all backgrounds. For example, our first month of the campaign will be focused on Proud to Be Black at Nevada. And at the end of each month, we'll be hosting a Zoom town hall similar to this one. So stay tuned for those dates, and you'll be hearing more about those initiatives and that campaign on the ASUN socials and the website. So just keep a lookout for that. And I'll be posting a link to our post-assessment survey in the chat right now, just to again, debrief and give your guys' opinions if we didn't talk about anything that you wanted to talk about in today's town hall, or anything that you would like to see mentioned in future town halls, and you can leave those comments there. So feel free to go ahead and fill that out. And again, thank you all for coming today. And with that, I'm going to close the Zoom out. So thank you all for coming.